Hello. Today we will discuss Blueprint Pillar 5, Governance and Accountability. During this discussion, you have the opportunity to complete the FCPS Blueprint Community Engagement Survey by accessing the QR code on your screen. We want to know your thoughts and your questions. The goal of Pillar 5 is to ensure coordination between agencies at all levels of Maryland government and institutions in the implementation requirements outlined in the Blueprint. Within this pillar is the establishment of the Accountability Implementation Board, or AIB. This board holds the state and local education agencies accountable for implementation of the Blueprint. In FCPS, we have a Blueprint Implementation Committee of 4, led by our Blueprint Coordinator. The purpose of this committee is to ensure we are meeting the requirements of the Blueprint. For our discussion today, we have 3 of the 4 members of the FCPS Blueprint Implementation Committee present. Dr. Sarah Sergo, our Blueprint Coordinator, Ms. Leslie Pellegrino, our Chief Financial Officer, and I serve as co-chairs of the committee. Ms. Heather Clayball, our Director of Budget, serves along with us. Today, Sarah and Leslie will share how FCPS is ensuring we are meeting the requirements outlined in the Blueprint. Thank you both for being with us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
It's great working with you all on the committee as well. So Leslie, I'll direct the first question to you. Can you share a little bit about how FCPS is developing the implementation plan for our school system?
Certainly. FCPS has been working on the Blueprint for several years now. Initially, of course, as we were getting the early phases of the funding for the program, we started to expand our full-day pre-K programs. We also opened our first community school. And so these are some of the things we started in the early years. About a year and a half ago, we created committees, four committees that are looking at the Blueprint implementation plan and actually creating FCPS's plan. And those 4 committees are led by incredible people here within the school system. And they have been able to focus and look at each of those individual pillars of the Blueprint and be able to put together specifically what FCPS is going to do to implement the plan in its fidelity over the next 10 years.
10 years is a long time, and so it's a plan that we want to make sure is going to be meeting all the needs of our students while also adhering to the mandates of the Blueprint. So with that in mind, Sarah, what are we doing to make sure that we're getting community input and engaging the community with the development of our plan?
So the important thing to know about the implementation plan is that each of our local school systems across the state are provided a template. The template is incredibly prescriptive, and it really tells each of these local systems what are the criteria for success? How do you demonstrate progress around the Blueprint and the expectations? So when we think about input, this is really from the place of idea generation. What are the ideas that our teachers, our leaders, our community members, our business partners, our elected officials, what ideas do they have for us that we might want to consider as we focus our efforts on meeting the expectations of the Blueprint? Going back to what you shared before, it's important to know that over the 10 years, we are going to develop this plan essentially 3 times. The plan that we're working on now, which is due on March 15th, is to cover the first 2 years of implementation. A year from now, we'll do another plan to update what we've done and then focus on the next 2 years. Then in 2027, we'll do it for a 3rd time, focusing on the last 5 years of implementation. So what we're doing along the way is having our community stakeholders, our principals, our teachers, their voices represented not only in membership on these steering committees and on these groups, but we're also doing things like doing these videos and asking people their input through surveys and lots of other opportunities to share their ideas.
Thank you for that. A large part of this is accountability. So after we develop our plan and it's been approved, who's responsible for ensuring and monitoring that we're adhering to the plan, yearly progress monitoring and so forth? Where does that lie in FCPS?
So I think it happens in 2 different ways. One is sort of the philosophical approach that most of us follow in FCPS and many school systems across the country and even in the state, which is what I call the PDSA process, the Plan, Do, Study, Act process. The steering committee, as it exists now, will continue. The pillar groups will continue. And in addition to just us looking at our work locally, the state and the AIB have reporting requirements. And so there's a number of reports that we have to produce that Ms. Pellegrino and her team, along with our school accountability team, will be producing to demonstrate our progress and evidence of meeting the goals of the Blueprint.
So a large part of the Blueprint is the funding piece, and our responsibility is making sure we're being fiscally responsible with those funds that are coming into our school system. And the priority for us is always ensuring that those funds go to our schools and ultimately to our students. So how are we accounting for, what are we doing to ensure that funding is going where it's supposed to go, not just after the implementation plan is put into effect next year, but in the years to come?
That's a great question. One of the big points of the legislation is they wanted to make sure, the state legislators wanted to make sure that that funding was following the students. So if funding is given to us for English learner students or special education students specifically, they wanted to make sure that funding follows the student, follows the child to the school level. For years, we have been making sure that we account and record our expenses at our school level because we knew this type of requirement was coming forth. But now specifically, as we start getting more Blueprint funding, we're going to have to make sure that all that money that is directed for those specific students and specific groups of students is making it down to the school levels. And so we'll be working that from a budget perspective and also from a budget monitoring perspective with our individual schools.
So Leslie, thank you for sharing about the funding piece of this. And so we know that community engagement and feedback is really important when we're creating plans such as this because it impacts our students. The Blueprint and what we're being asked to do in that plan, though, is very prescriptive. So can you talk a little bit about that and what we're being asked to put into that plan and not put into that plan?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you asked that question because I think one of the things that is a misnomer about the Blueprint is that it's just a waterfall of money cascading its way into the local school systems. A couple of things that we would want our communities to know. Number one, it doesn't include capital funding. So one of the things that's important is when we talk about pre-K expansion, particularly in a district like FCPS where we are really at or above facility capacity, it's on us locally and with our county government and our other funding sources to identify how, if we need space, the Blueprint funding doesn't cover the use of space. It's also very limited in terms of what it is intended to do. And so it isn't just anybody who would like us to initiate a program or someone who would like us to expand a partnership. It has to be very focused and connected to the criteria for success in the document. And I'll give you a basic example. One of the things that the Blueprint asks us to do around early childhood is the expansion of pre-K. That doesn't mean that we can add things to that program in a way that is beyond what the intent of the law. So we have to be very specific in not only documenting our efforts to expand pre-K, but then making sure that inside of that legislation and inside of the template, we are following what those criteria for success marks are. It might be about credentialing our staff, it might be about the percent of students who we are serving, it might even be about the partnerships we have with private child care providers. So it's very prescriptive in sense of what it is we are going to be asked to demonstrate. Doesn't mean we don't welcome other ideas, but it isn't just a free-for-all, if you will, around anything that we can think of that we think will improve education for students in our county or for the state.
Yeah, that is important to know.
Yeah. And I want to comment also on the funding piece of it, because this funding, again, it's funding coming from our state government, but it's also funding coming from our local government. This is a shared responsibility for the implementation of the Blueprint plan over the next 10 years. So it's going to need not only funding that we're going to get at the state level through the funding formulas, but also funding from our local governments to help supplement and support that.
So can you share with us, thinking about how prescriptive it is and what we have to put into that plan, and also knowing that we value community feedback and input into the plan, what have we done as a school system and when did we begin meeting to determine what would go into our plan before submission to the state?
So we've been doing a lot of work. The steering committees are 75 people deep. So each of the pillars has 2 to 3 co-chairs. Each of the committees underneath those 2 to 3 co-chairs has anywhere from 10 to 25 members. So across the school system and inclusive of our community partners, our higher ed partners and other people, there's a lot of people working on this. All of those individuals are providing input into the actual authorship of the plan. The community engagement piece is to help gauge the reaction and response of the community. Are there things that they think, given what our expectations are, that we might want to reconsider, reevaluate, build upon? And so it's not input in the sense of, we think you should do this. It's looking at what the Blueprint asks of us, and are there other ways we could think about doing that same work, or different opportunities we could do to refine the work that we're already planning to do.
I think it's important to note that FCPS has been working on this for over a year. The steering committee started to meet over a year ago, and each Blueprint member of the committee got a copy of the law to make sure that we knew the law, because that's an essential piece of making sure that we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing, and that we're also monitoring what the AIB is doing, because they're also making changes. And when those changes are made, Can you all share with us, are they just arbitrarily made, or do they have to go through legislative process?
Most of the changes we'll see to the legislation will have to go through, again, the state government, the state legislators, and they will be looking at this, I'm sure, probably every session to see what details of the plan needs to be tweaked or the law needs to be tweaked. The law itself is huge, it's massive, and they will carefully look at that and receive feedback not only from the AIB, the implementation board, but the school systems and also the citizens of the state of Maryland, what's working, what's not working.
Yeah, Sarah, you mentioned the number of plans that we'll be creating over the next 10 years. And I think it's important to note that it is a deep body of work, the law is. So it is going to be prone to change. So we'll see what happens in the years to come. But for now, we're making sure that we do everything in accord with what the law is right now.
Absolutely.
Anything else you all want to share with our community regarding this particular pillar?
Well, we're going to continue to stay connected with our community around this work. So we've been before our board a couple of times already this year to bring the work public facing and accessible. On December 6th of 2022, we did our first board presentation for this year. It had been presented before in the past. We came back on February 22nd to talk about pillars 1 and 3, and again on March 8th to talk about pillars 2, 4, and 5. All of those presentations are available publicly, along with our plan, which will be submitted today on March 15th. And we hope that we will continue to have opportunities not only to hear from the public, but we will be presenting to the board on our measurement of progress and our refinements to the plan as we go along.
It is wonderful working on this with you two and with Heather. It's a great team. I'm looking forward to seeing how this continues to support students across FCPS. And thank you for joining us for another Blueprint discussion. Here are 3 key points to remember about Pillar 5, governance and accountability. 1, it creates an accountability and implementation board charged with developing a comprehensive 10-year plan to ensure implementation of the Blueprint across the state. Next, it establishes expert review teams made up of educators and administrators to collaborate with school-based and district staff to determine that the implementation plan is progressing at the school level, to analyze Blueprint implementation, and develop recommendations, measures, and strategies for student success. And finally, each school system in the state is responsible for creating, submitting, and implementing a Blueprint implementation plan. Currently, we are working on our 2-year plan that must be submitted by March 15th. The FCPS Blueprint Steering Committee has been working diligently to complete our plan, and we appreciate all their hard work on creating a plan that best meets the needs of each and every FCPS student. For more information, please go to fcps.org/blueprint. Thank you again for joining us on this Blueprint discussion episode. Take care, everyone.